coming to you from Kimberley on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. And this is taken with a telephoto, but it's actually the view from my front porch, which I vastly enjoy. And so one of the great things for me about being this kind of lockdown is that I've been home and I haven't been traveling. I thought before I jumped into the book, I would share just one little story about Canmore, because I grew up in Toronto, and I was kind of really the geeky guy at school and good at math and science. And I studied engineering physics. And when I graduated, that's when I realized the only jobs possible with an engineering physics degree were in academia and research, and they didn't really suit me too well. So I started guiding rafts on the Ottawa River. There was just something about that life that spoke to me and felt, I mean, on a more serious level, vital and important, and how I wanted to spend my precious time, or my parts of my life. And so I eventually packed up all my stuff into a rusty pickup and really started driving west with no plan. And I drove into the kind of tightening Bow Valley there and past what seemed like an ill-placed cement plant at the gateway to these national parks, or whatever that thing is there. And then I saw the road sign to Canmore, and this twigged something in my reptilian brain. And I remember the young man who had taught me to raft guide, our kind of senior trainer, had come back from a Yamnuska course. And he described it as really the toughest thing he'd ever done. It was this 3-month mountain semester. And I was scared of heights. And so I drove past Canmore thinking there's no way I could do it. And I got to Golden, and I called the Yamnuska. I found a pamphlet, and I called the Yamnuska, and they said, we're running 3 semesters this fall with 12 people. We have 35 people enrolled. There's 1 spot left. It costs $9,975, and I had 10 grand in the bank. And I signed up, and I spent the 3 extraordinary months kind of based out of that ACC cabin outside of Canmore. And that was a very, very formative time. You know, that was Sarah McLachlan and the Hip were on the radio, and I remember the change as the aspens yellowed and the warm winds came through the valley. And so it really led to the life that I lead now. And so I have really fond memories of Canmore. But now I'm on the other side. I ended up here in Kimberley. Pat Morrow had suggested the houses were cheap and the mine had closed. And really the reason I ended up here was it seemed to be this intersection of cheap homes, an airport, and a ski hill, which you don't find everywhere. And so I moved here without knowing anyone 17 years ago. And really we're going to talk about the word paspun, but which is this social structure. My paspun's here now. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my book, and I know some of you may have seen me at the Banff Festival. I've tried to put in a few new things. A lot of it will obviously, the book hasn't changed, but I've got a few video clips and whatnot. If you have any questions as we're going, please don't hesitate to type them in the chat. I can see it on the side here. I'll try to look. Oh, well, I can see it there. So go ahead at any point and type those in. And then we'll have a good Q&A at the end. But really, just onto the book. The book starts with one of those moments that I think, you know, we all share, and the experience has its roots in this type of moment that I think we share as humans when we ask ourselves, you know, what are we doing in our life right now? Why are we, you know, is this the way we want to be living? And I think we find ourselves at times asking that more urgently and more frequently as we get inundated with all types of social media and the assault of modernity, not just the electronic assault, but all of that. And so the book opens with a scene of me, and I'm with my 2 young boys, and I recently bought an iPhone. I'm a late adopter, but it sucked me in. It was just like a tractor beam. I couldn't stop looking at this thing. Someone had told me about Facebook, and I joined it, and then I found myself looking at what people had eaten for lunch in Toronto rather than listening or paying attention to these 2 beautiful things. And so Bodhi, my older son, who was 7 when we took this journey, this is actually in the Republic of Georgia. We were on a horse trip many years earlier, but Bodhi called me out and he said, you didn't hear anything I just said. And that was a Saturday morning, and I was sitting beside them at the dining room table. And I was really struck by that idea that I want to do better as a father, as a person, as a human. And I feel I can do better, but I don't know how to do better. It's not changing. I could feel it thumping downhill. And so I'm not really an innately religious person, and I say that with profound respect. My background's in science, and so when people tell you, oh, they use a forked branch to find water underground, I'm like, this is, I need to understand why. I'm just not an innate believer. My wife, on the other hand, absolutely is always talking to me about Mercury and retrograde and, my spirit animal and all these things. But the one area where we truly overlapped was with Tibetan Buddhism. And I know many of you will have traveled in Tibetan Buddhist kingdoms. And I'm sure many of you also felt a feeling, no matter where you lie on that scale, of profound comfort and curiosity about this kind of otherworldly religion or philosophy or whatever Buddhism is, and it kind of straddles that line. And one thing that I've often felt, and it really from my very first time I trekked in through the Khumbu to Everest, was I get a bit of a rash when wild places get altered by human hand. There's not many times that I find that something I'm encouraging, but the Buddhists have this uncanny ability to actually alter the wild landscape in a way that seems pleasurable and appropriate, with these beautiful carved mani stones and their prayer flags, and just these kind of prayer wheels being powered by streams and hydro. And so, and if you've been on a similar trek, you go past Tengboche or any monastery in the Himalaya, and you get this fleeting glimpse. I'd always wanted to know more. There's these kind of shadowy monks and lamas inside. And so I was drawn to know more. And Christine, of course, was absolutely, it's kind of really keen on this. She'd actually spent an entire very long winter studying Buddhism in a Calgary Community Center in the basement. And so I thought someone was telling me they couldn't hear me. So this is where our Venn diagrams overlapped. And we kind of tossed around this idea of going to a Buddhist monastery and taking the kids. We didn't think it would do them any harm, perhaps some good. And then on this Cheerio incident, when the boys were spraying food all over the table and I wasn't paying attention to them, I just remember saying to Christine, I think we should do this now. Like now's the time. And she agreed. And so it was not that long after that we walked out our back door. It was actually about 4 months later. And this is the back door of our house. And this is us coming out. If you look very carefully at this picture, you will see between Christine and the side of the door, there is a TV person. I'm going to talk about this TV crew that tagged along with us for a bit, because I'm going to pilfer some of their footage. But here's Bodhi and Taj, age 3 and 7, coming out. We live near the headwaters of the Columbia River here, just up. The Columbia basically starts at Canal Flats there, and we threw in a couple of canoes, and we've used this catamaran system for ages and paddled north. It's just really the breaking of spring. There are beavers and a few red-winged blackbirds. Otherwise, the wetlands were pretty quiet. And we got to Golden, where we stashed the canoes and flagged down a train. In fact, we'd prearranged for the Rocky Mountaineer to stop and pick us up. And after 5 days of camping, we did not smell like we belonged on that train, but we had this glorious 2-day ride to Vancouver. And in Vancouver, we boarded a 77,000-ton container ship that was headed across the North Pacific. And we can talk a little bit about this in the discussion, but this was a really wonderful part of the trip, and people are often fascinated by container ship travel. There are berths on nearly every container ship going around the world. And for me, it was absolutely wonderful, because it was like a cruise ship with no people. And it's not that I'm an introvert, but it's just like, you're on this massive working ship. The circumference is about 1 kilometer. You could do a 10K run if you went around it 10 times. And yeah, I truly could have sat up on the wing of the superstructure here and just watched the ocean pass by. But our boys required pretty constant attention at that age. And so I've said to Christine, once they're off to university, I could handle doing that again. But we made landfall in Busan, South Korea. After 17 days, we got diverted to Russia because bunker fuel went on sale. And so every ship in the North Pacific filled up. And then we started this great overland journey by train and by car, by rickshaw and riverboat. And we went through Korea into China, across old Tibet in Amdo, and then up and over Tibet. Actually visited north side Mount Everest base camp. And again, one of my worries, and we'll talk about this maybe in the Q&A, was altitude and children. But the kids were fine. We acclimatized with them very, very carefully as we slowly took them higher and higher. And then we descended down into the Terai of Nepal and finally out onto the scorching hot plains of India. And we went from Varanasi to Agra, where we visited Taj's namesake at the Taj Mahal, and then Delhi and Chandigarh and up to Manali. And just past Manali, we came to a roadhead at Darsha where we...
Hey, I hate to interrupt here, but we've got something going on with our video with... it seems to be affected by one lovely patron named Parja. I'm just wondering if you can adjust your video there. It seems to be throwing something off here for people.
No worries at all. On my end, I'm trying to see if I can see.
I've got you perfectly, but a lot of people now cannot see you.
Okay.
I'm just gonna...
They're probably preferring they can't see me.
I doubt it. I'm going to just allow people to unmute if one or two people can speak up. But Shauna Strain, if you can hear me, can you just tell me if you can see Bruce?
Hi, Helen, it's Patty. I have the same thing. Full screen is Parja's name, and in the thumbnails, there's you and Bruce and me and a few other people. Now, Parja's in the thumbnail as well, but no, Bruce is still not full screen.
Yeah, it almost looks like Parja might be pinned up there, and I'm not quite sure how to unpin.
Okay, let's see. I'm not sure how that...
I believe that Parja needs to unpin herself. She is pinned. So she's going...
Oh, hang on. I just saw a thing called remove spotlight. Did that work? Sorry.
Okay, yep, that's done it.
That worked.
Awesome. I have no idea how that happened since I don't even know how to do spotlight. So there you go. That was a little Zoom hiccup, but thanks, Bruce. Everybody will just unmute you, or sorry, I'll mute you all and Bruce will continue. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. And am I up there now? Is it working okay? It looks like I've been able to pin myself.
You look awesome.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, that's actually me there. So we at Chandigarh, then I was kind of we did this long
Hey, Bruce, we got to unmute you here. Perfect.
Hello, was I muted?
You were, but
boy.
There we go. We're all good.
Okay, well, this is the ancient trail into Zanskar. We're suffering some technical difficulties, but anyways, I wanted you to see that because that will play into the story a little bit. And if you missed all that, I don't know where my sound went out at, but we basically did this 10-day trek into Zanskar, and it was 97 days after we left our home here that we arrived at the base of these cliffs. And this is Karshigampa, about 1,000-year-old Buddhist monastery, barnacled to these steep rocks at the union of two huge rivers lost between the Tibetan plateau and the Himalaya. And I have another tiny bit of video I'd like to play here. And this is just actually our arrival at Karshigampa. And this was the first time that we met Lama Wangal, who was the gentleman that we ended up staying with.
Hello. I can't stop pinching myself and thinking, how can this be real?
Like, what is going on? Is this my son?
So that was it. Basically, we pulled into the monastery. We walked in the class, and then the TV crew left us, and we were taken in by Lama Wangal, who you saw us meeting there. He was the ex-head lama of the monastery, and so in Tibetan tradition, positions within the monastery held for 3 years, and monks will work, you know, once you become a fully ordained monk, they begin working their way up, managing different temples, and then, you know, perhaps being an accountant or disciplinarian, and eventually, if all the stars are aligned, they become the head lama for 3 years, and then they retire to a position of great prestige known as a lazur. And this was Lama Wangal at this point. He'd been retired for about 3 years, and he became in many ways a father figure for us, or a grandfather figure. He guided us through this experience. He kind of supported us and befriended us. And we spent the next just over 3 months living in an 8-foot by 8-foot earthen room. There was no power, no flush toilet, no running water. And I write in the book, and I sincerely mean it, was as beautiful and as peaceful and idyllic a time as I can remember. And we basically woke each morning to the sound of horns that echoed across the mountainsides. And this was the call to prayer. You can see it's a very desiccated landscape in the rain shadow of the Himalaya. And we would climb up to the puja hall. There was about 60 monks resident at Karshigampa that summer, and 17 novices, and a variety would show up for morning prayers. And morning prayers would go anywhere between 40 minutes and 4 or 5 hours. You never quite were sure which. And butter tea would be served, and sampa, the barley porridge of this ubiquitous across the Himalayas. And it was interesting because before we went, I would be the last one you'd expect to see here. I did not miss a single day of puja. I can't explain why. It just felt important, and I wanted to be there. And Christine probably made it to about 40 or maybe 50% of them, and that was just what was right for her at the time. So the puja would end around noon, and we'd spend some time exploring the valley, and then each afternoon about 4 or 5 o'clock, we would teach English and mathematics to a group of 17 of these novice monks. And they were very beautiful boys who became the constant companions of my own 2 sons. And they had a profound effect on our journey too. Buddhism in this valley is undergoing tremendous strain as modernity creeps in. And so many of these boys had basically their parents had been coerced to send them. The lamas would perhaps refuse to do the necessary blessings for a family's farm unless they supplied a boy to the monastery. And previously, boys who went to the monastery had profound opportunity, the best schooling in the valley. Now they probably got the worst schooling in the valley because there's many private schools springing up, and typically they would, because they had not come of their own volition, would leave around the age of somewhere between 13 and 16, by which point they couldn't complete schooling, and it wasn't a bright future for them as taxi drivers or something like that in the valley. But they had been pulled away from parental love, and here were our boys at 3 and 7 who so clearly were just flourishing with our love and our attention, and these boys so desperately needed that. So they were a huge part of our journey, and I have one final little video clip I'm going to play for you here. This is, I'm going to, oops, turn that down a little bit for you, but this is our tiny little 1 classroom school, and this is age 6 to age 17, and everyone is participating. It's pretty neat to see the 14-year-olds and 17-year-olds up against the wall there, enjoying this as much as their younger compatriots. We're going to zoom down and you'll see some of the younger boys here. And I can remember every one of these boys as if we were there yesterday. It's been 6 years since we were there. And so they became a major part of our experience and our time there. And so essentially, as the days flowed into weeks, flowed into months, this community of monks and children, the community of Karsha, the village below us, the ancient lifestyle that permeates this village came into focus in a sense for us in a way that I don't think we could have, or I would have ascertained had I just passed through more fleetingly. And so just quickly to give you a sense of geographical setting, Zanskar is a valley that is really shoehorned in between the Himalaya to the south and the Tibetan Plateau to the north. And really its defining characteristic is its inaccessibility. There's just no easy way in or out. And it's formed by the union of these two big mountain rivers that have their headwaters in glacier systems in the high peaks. And those two rivers, after they merge right here in front of this photograph. This is a view from Lama Wangel's front door that really kind of defines my entire time there in Zanskar. They flow through a canyon called the Chadar, which is, for all intents and purposes, unpassable. It's pretty serious whitewater. Yes, butter traders did tiptoe through there at points during the winter historically, and we've seen it as a more popular trekking route, but it's not an easy way in, and it's frozen for much of the year. And so people would have to historically hike quite a distance to get here. It was missed by the caravans of the Silk Route and whatnot. It essentially existed in isolation. This community of stable community of about 10,000 agricultural villages split between about 40 settlements, all perched on the edge of this valley where these clear glacier waters tumble down and then were used as irrigation to grow these meager crops of barley and some other root vegetables in the short growing season in this just really unfertile glacial till. And they did an amazing job of creating soil in that. And it was in the 8th century that Himalayan Buddhism entered the valley and quickly took root and foothold and permeated every aspect of culture. These incredible stately monasteries sprang up, and as you see often in Himalayan Buddhism, in the most staggering and stunning locations, and that's meant as a means of balancing kind of the necessary, communal monk seclusion from proximity to an alms-bearing village. So in Zanskar and Putkal, you see this incredible monastery built inside a cave. At Barden, you see one on top of a rock spire. And here at Karsha, they're on the sides of this steep cliff. And it was a quirk of fate in 1834 that a dog or a raiding party came into the valley. They'd come from the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir under the auspices of trying to increase Pashmina wool production and claim the valley for the Maharaja. But what this tiny little event did was tilt the fortunes of Zanskar away from Tibet. It had become a de facto appendage of that great kingdom that then spread across the entire Tibetan plateau. And was known broadly as Little Tibet. And so for that, 100 years later, this region was spared, just spared the crushing annexation of Tibet by Chinese forces. It was spared the atrocities of the Cultural Revolution in the decades that followed. And so within Zanskar, as we see in a few little enclaves like Dolpo and Mustang and a few other places scattered around the more remote valleys of the Front Range of the Himalaya, we see this last flickering incarnation of that once great empire where Tibetan Buddhism is still practiced freely in its original landscape. And so that's the, whoa, make that a little bit smaller. Excuse me. Not that small. How about there? And so that's the world that we entered. And I want to take you now to a point about 3/4 of the way through the book that'll start to illustrate some of the things that emerged for us as we spent this time there. So this is, to the woman in purple is Lama, and Lama Wangel is in his robes there. This is Lama Wangel's youngest sister. And Lama Wangel had brought us here to help with harvest, which was in full swing. At this point. And so we started pulling barley by hand and carrying alfalfa. I estimate we carried somewhere between 8 and 10 tons. I carried 8 and 10 tons. It was only me who seemed dumb enough to do it, up to the roof for winter fodder. But I mean, the family would have had to do that otherwise. They were carrying all types of peas to threshing circles and barley to threshing haystacks and whatnot. But this is alfalfa you see right here, a really pungent, beautiful smell. And I'd throw a load like that on your back, and you'd feel the locusts wriggling around on your t-shirt. And in this kind of haze of exertion, as we worked, I became aware of a social construct called the Paspun, which I realized was vitally important for Zanskari life. So a Paspun is a group of 3 or 4 households that are bonded together. They share religious artifacts, some key things that every kind of 3 or 4 families should have within one of their chapels. But more importantly, they support each other during the physically intensive times of planting and harvest, but they also cradle each other during, you know, the passage through life, through birth and through marriage, through sickness, and ultimately through death. And we experienced a cremation rites while we were in Karsha, and it was largely taken care of by the Paspun, because you need people to help at these times. And every family in every village, every one of those 10,000 Zanskaris who have lived in quite essentially equilibrium for a millennia would be the member of a Paspun. And strikingly to me, it was a concept for which there was no equivalent word in English, and there was really no equivalent understanding. Although maybe we are now, you know, being called upon to think about that with what we're going through with lockdown. But our Paspun's pretty small right now. But as we were out on those fields, I watched Lamo's father-in-law, Dorje's father. He was 88, a veteran of Ladakhi Scouts, taking the bark off poplar to use for fence posts. His 86-year-old mother was watching children while the parents worked in the fields. This is Doda, who was a mute, clearly developmentally handicapped woman, some probably in her 60s, toothless. But there she was in the fields helping. And I don't want to leap to any judgments, but she appeared happy. She appeared that she was a part of something bigger, which is so important for the human condition. There she was at dinner as we all splayed around the fire and ate tupa, the kind of soup of the Zanskaris. And I was aware of how different this was, of how differently we treated our elders, our children, those with different needs within our society, our inability to find that time and, I don't want to say compassion, but the ability to integrate them in a way like this. And once again, I was humbled by the Zanskaris and aware of how much profound thinking I could learn, or I could take from them, how important this culture was. But the Paspun wasn't the only force at play in those fields. And so, and this is Christine and Lamo pulling barley by hand. And but it was around this time that I realized that the fields next to this lay fallow. They'd never been planted. And this was essentially unthinkable. So Zanskar, like all Tibetan cultures, follows the tradition, I'm going to say it wrong, of primogeniture. The oldest son inherits all the land. The oldest daughter inherits all the physical wealth in the form of turquoise jewelry, usually. So these farms had been within families, this precious, precious land. Every square foot of this soil, you know, had been built by dedicated composting. Every one of those feathery roots of that barley was shaken and shaken until there wasn't a speck of soil on it before it went to the haystack. Now that lay unused for the first time in oral or any type of memory. Dorje could never remember a farm lying fallow. And not long after, diesel tractors arrived. And the reason that this lay fallow was that the children of that family had all gone to private school that fall, 2 daughters and a son, and it left the family unable to fulfill their obligations to their Paspun. Land in Zanskar is not measured by hectares or acres, it's measured by days. In the number of days it takes a person to harvest the land. There'll be a 20-day field and a 10-day field, and they had a 45 or 50-day farm, and they couldn't do it. And so while that boded incredibly well for the future of those children, what it meant was that the parents had sold the farm to a Chinese multinational. So it may have been Chinese, but Indian workers showed up from the southern states of Kerala and whatnot. And of course, by no fault of their own, those southern workers, those migrant workers, were not a member of a Paspun. They couldn't contribute to the society in the way that those who had come before had. And the parents had, in exchange for their farm, built a roadside shack from wood on the side of a dirt track that they were hoping would soon be busy with lorries coming from Srinagar, and they were going to sell soda pop and Ichiban noodles to these long distance truck drivers. And this kind of alludes to or hints at the fact that a road has been pushed through Zanskar for almost 20 years by the Indian government. And we encountered it right when we started walking in that trail we were following. We found a digger on it. And all that footage I showed you is now a passable motorway. Cars drive through those canyons on that little ledge you saw us hiking on with donkeys and mules and small hoofed horses. And so this project, it's really a military thing because the sensitive northern frontiers of Pakistan and China, they have burrowed under the Rotang law. They will burrow under the Shingo law, but they've now pushed over the Shingo law. This will be paved. You can now drive from Manali to the center, to Pudum, the heart of Zanskar, which was a 10-day walk when we were there 6 years ago. And within a few years, it'll be a 1-hour drive on from there to Leh, the capital of the Ladakh province. And so this really began to make me consider during my time there what, we all feel this visceral sense of loss when we hear these stories, and we struggle with this because this is a story we've seen repeated around the globe, and we feel a sense of tragedy. But I was trying to see it in perspective and understand why I felt that way. And really the metaphor that kept coming back to me was, this is a view of Zanskar, that little fertile splash, it lost in the middle of those sere and dry mountains. And I kept seeing it as this little lifeboat that was afloat in this tiny valley. And unbeknownst to the people there, not in a naive way, but these floodwaters of modernity were rising outside the mountains, outside the Tibetan plateau. And when they flooded over these natural barricades and came into the valley, they were going to bring things that were incredibly important to the Zanskaris. They would bring medical advances. And I realized very early on that most of the women in the valley timed their childbirth for summer so they could walk out or drive out and get to Leh. And so no one would begrudge the Zanskaris those for a second, that type of advance, which is so crucial in healthcare and education and technology and easing of the rigors of this physically demanding life. But at the same time, when all that flooded in, these subtle things that I was experiencing, the passpun, some of the skills of the Zanskaris that were artistic incarnations of human imagination, of ways of being that we were now seeking in the West, would be lost in that rush. And it was almost inevitable in some way. And the Tibetan Buddhists are very good with the idea of impermanence. And they just laugh when I asked about this, but it seemed devastatingly sad to me. And one of the things that I really felt, and really a central theme of the book that the Zanskaris had mastered so well, was this idea of attention. And we often talk about the only thing we have is time, but I would argue all we have is time plus multiplied by, or the exponent of, is attention, where we put our attention on during that precious time. And so I start my book with this epigraph from Simone Weil, which says, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And really, I feel that is the essence of what I took away from Zanskar, this idea that we all have this gift. It's like a fire hose flowing out of us. It's just endless. We have this attention, and we can choose to put it on our children, our partners, our community, those we love, or we can allow it to be strip mined by these powerful forces. And we know the world's full of very bright lights and all types of things trying to get our attention. And so I struggled quite a bit. The Zanskaris, of course, the taming of the monkey mind is, of course, the central theme of much of Buddhism, and the Tibetan Buddhists pursue this in their own ways. But even the villagers, you would see them with mala beads in their hands. They would be reciting little snippets of scripture as they worked in the fields. And all of this was really just an anchor to the moment, to say that right here, right now, I'm here, I'm doing this, and I'm not off in a million other places. And so I write a little bit about my struggle with meditation, because it's not something that we, we're becoming more fluent in the West, but it's not something that I was particularly at ease with or fluent with. But someone who was fluent with this was my son, Bodhi, and I'm just going to introduce you to him for a little bit. Even his name is a tip of a hat to that mythical Tibetan figure, the Bodhisattva, the Buddha of compassion, who upon achieving enlightenment chooses to forsake nirvana and instead returns to our world to help each of us on our own journeys towards deeper understanding. And what could be a more poetic or a more accurate description of Bodhi's role in my life? And in fairness, there was a little bit of an overlap of the Venn diagram here too. And I'd suggested originally Bodhi, thinking of Patrick Swayze's character in Point Break, the bank robbing surfer. But Bodhi is not a surfer, bro, and he is way more the Buddha of compassion. From the earliest day, he would refuse to let us kill even a mosquito. And this started, I mean, honestly, at 8 or 10 months, we were in Patagonia, and he would fuss. He basically, I was reminded of those archival films of old lamas around the Portola Palace when the farmers were digging irrigation ditches on their hands and knees, saving worms. That's what Bodhi was like. And so as you can imagine, and going on a northern Canadian canoe trip and not being able to kill any mosquitoes is desperately difficult for the parents. You've got these two plump babies that look like a feast and you want to just squish everything, but Bodhi would refuse to. And I would come home from trips overseas with a little Buddha, and he would cover them in feathers and rocks and little trinkets. And so he showed this profound comfort with Buddhism, an almost bizarre ease with it from the earliest days. And when on our trip to Karshigampa, we stopped at a Drepung monastery in Lhasa, and there was a meditation cave, and Bodhi kind of asked, what's this for? And the guide said, oh, well, this is where, he explained, this is where the founder of the monastery spent 7 years meditating. And Bodhi asked, well, what's meditation? And there was a little cushion on the floor, a kind of really dirty, soiled cushion, and a kind of small altar with this sea of kind of little candles burning on it. And Bodhi sat down, and she showed him to put his hands together and pretend the little Buddha was inside, and just let his thoughts focus on his breathing. And they didn't move for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. And I really thought he was like pulling a trick on us. And then he jumped up and said, wow, that was like I was nowhere. And he ran off to take a pee with his brother. And so as the book progresses, Bodhi becomes quite a theme in it, because I'm able, you're granted the special privilege of a father to understand more clearly his profound beauties and strengths and challenges, and particularly those that come from him being on the autism spectrum. And there were so many uncanny parallels between autism and Tibetan Buddhism, this abhorring of distraction, this insistence on the raw, burning truth of the moments. I will quickly say that disclosing a child's autism diagnosis or any other diagnosis can be controversial. And while we were kind of working on the early stage of planning this television show, we realized there was no way we could have a crew with us and they wouldn't realize something was going on. But on a far bigger scale, Christine and I felt really deeply that, so that the other side of the coin is the child should be free to choose when they tell the world, and they should probably be old enough to understand the ramifications. And so when they're 18, maybe they can, or 16 or 15, tell people. But Christine and I felt that just didn't sit right with us, because here was this central plank to who Bodhi was, how he navigated the world, but we're telling him we're going to keep it a secret. We aren't going to tell other people about it. That just felt like it led to shame. Anyways, I just wanted to say it was not something we took lightly, or I take lightly, and writing about it was probably the most difficult thing. Writing about your family at all is difficult, and writing about your son being on the spectrum was really challenging, because he's going to have one view of the book now and another view of it 10 years from now, and another 20. He did read it in the early stage, and we were on a sea kayak trip. He was 11 years old, and he ran out of reading material, said I had this draft copy. I'm like, Bodhi, why don't you read this? And because I really wanted him to have gone through it before, and he looked through it and he said, rooted out a few factual errors, and he said, it's good, but it's never going to be a New York Times bestseller. I was like, thanks for the honesty, buddy. But I guess the only thing, there's nothing really more that I want to say on that, but Bodhi really flourished in this world where the distractions were removed, and it allowed me, and one of the beauties of the book, and really for me in writing it, and one of the beauties of that entire experience was really seeing my son flourish and grow and be accepted. Perhaps it was in this land beyond language, because the boys he played with, there was very little shared language, but he found himself in a way that I think will affect the rest of his passage through life. And so it was heartbreaking when we came to leave. This is little Norgay the Tulku, believed to be an incarnation of the weird ear whispering lineage, caught giving sermons at age 2 to rooms full of rapt lamas, and you wonder where does reality end and beauty merge in with it. But he was an extraordinary boy, and he ran down the trail after us as we carried these heavy duffel bags, and he was yelling after us, "See you tomorrow in Puja." And he knew he wasn't going to see us, and it was really powerfully and profoundly sad to say farewell. We hiked out to the north through an astounding landscape. This is in the depths of the Shilla Gorge. And when we got to the mouth of this gorge, there's a scene the one last scene I want to touch on in the book. And we're all in our Zanskari robes. I look a little bit like Nick Nolte at a DUI photograph, and we were picked up by 3 young men in these purring silver minivans from Leh. And the ancient Paspun system was in effect even here. The men who had guided us through the mountains called the members of their Paspun, who were now in Leh working as computer programmers for the Indian military. And they all showed up wearing puffy jackets as if they were at the Banff Festival, and tortoiseshell glasses and nice jeans, and they smelled like bottles of cologne. And I sat down beside one in that red breakfast tent, and he kind of looked at me and he said, "It's pretty funny, eh? You're dressed up like a Zanskari and I'm dressed up like an American." And I agreed, and we talked, and I asked him about the changes coming to the valley, and because he could see them in a way that I felt perhaps some of the men who trekked out with us might not see them in the same context. And I just remember the story he told me after that so clearly. He'd been back to Zanskar. One of the men who trekked out with us, a young man called Sundup, his father had turned 60, so he'd gone back for this Paspun birthday. And he said, "Sundup's dad is amazing. I mean, he's a biologist. He knows when this certain bird returns, and by the length of the shadows, he's an astronomer too, when it's time to plant the barley. He's a metal worker. He's, forged his own plows. He's an engineer. He's built all his irrigation ditches. He's an architect. He designed his home." And the list went on and on. He's a storyteller, he's a historian, he knows all the oral history of this village and the valley. He can speak 4 different languages and read 4 written different languages. He's an entertainer, he can sing not 1 song, but 200. And then he said, every man and every woman in the entire valley is like him. And I'm 1 generation removed, and all I can do is program a computer. And I just felt in that story, he encapsulated so much of that loss, so much of the inevitability of it. I don't think there's any answer to that. Lama Wangal actually flew out and met us in Delhi. He wanted to come back to Canada, and I desperately was hoping that he would, because I felt it might cement in, help secure some of the things I'd learned in that time in Zanskar. But he was caught in an invisible dragnet set up by Canadian immigration, and we just ran into a bureaucratic dead end, and kind of brokenhearted, he left and flew back to the north, and we flew home. But I don't want to end on a note of despair. I definitely want to, the thing that I return to often as I was wrapping up the book and as I wrote the book were these eerily prescient words of Guru Rinpoche, who was an 8th century Buddhist reformer, who had written, and it seemed uncanny to me, more than 1,000 years ago, he said, when the iron horse flies, and when horses or when the iron horse flies and horses run on wheels, the Tibetan people will be scattered across the face of the earth. and he said like ants, but to make the metaphor work, I have to say as embers, because I guess what I felt ultimately is that flood of water comes into Zanskar, and we see this happen in cultures around the world, and we all have our own different relationships to them. Those little embers can take hold, can start a little flame within us and within others. It's not the same. It kind of definitely relies on us accepting the impermanence that the Buddhists believe in, but I definitely see those embers within Bodhi now. I'd like to think that we have some embers. I convinced my mom to move from Toronto to Kimberley, and she's part of our Paspun now, and hopefully the book spreads a few little embers of that. And to me, I suppose that's the message of hope as these ancient cultures do get flooded over, that some of the beautiful parts can prevail and carry on. So I'm going to leave it there. I probably could. I have like about 10 minutes left. If anyone wants to chat, I'm going to take that off the screen. Thank you guys very much for your time tonight.
Bruce, I have to say, you captured my attention so much that I almost forgot that I was the host and I had to unmute myself. I could listen to you all night. It was incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And having read your book and many of your writings in the past, I just need to say you're an exceptional author, an exceptional writer, but an exceptional speaker as well. And I'm sure everybody feels honored that we got to listen to you tonight. So I'm going to open it up to our lovely library audience. If you would like to type in the chat bar there a question for Bruce, he's going to be happy to answer those questions. And in the meantime, why don't I give people a few moments to type? Can I ask one or two questions while we're just waiting there, and they can type things up? So
they're all busy logging off.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And everybody, feel free to ask about the writing process or more specific questions about the trip, whatever piques your curiosity there. So Bruce, can you maybe answer to, like, what are some of the daily and weekly practices that you employ now to minimize your connection to your phone and to lengthen the impact that your trip had on you? Are there things that you consciously do?
I mean, there's a few things that are cemented in, and so one thing that's happened is Bodhi really took to meditation. We started using something called Headspace, which is an online app, and I sometimes wonder if he's actually more keen on his run streak than he is on the actual meditation itself. But that has become part of our nightly routine. So every night we meditate with Bodhi. Taj not right now. Occasionally we will do one as a family, but that is a daily thing. I have a few things set up on all my electronics that will time out if I do spend too much time doing something other than writing. I had a blackout thing for when I was writing. I have a thing that gets me actually to stand up every 20 minutes when I'm at the computer, and I just move my body. But the biggest thing for me is two things. And one is just the awareness. And I don't know how to really say this. I think we all feel it in some way. I can, around the time of US elections, I can find myself like staring at news and Twitter feeds like too relentlessly, and it's not really doing me any good. But I start to feel that feedback loop of me going back in. I'll put my phone down, then I'll go and pick it up again. And I've kind of learned just to, break that cycle and understand that it's happening and stop doing it. And I don't have a great explanation of how I do that. And the other thing is really I use my breath a lot, and I don't have any particular breath practice. I'm in a cold tub every day, and even when I'm doing some hard workouts of Nordic skiing or something, I will return to my breath quite a bit. So that's been probably the most endearing part.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's just check here and see if there's any questions. Come on, you guys. There's got to be.
Doug Reese laugh. Hey, Doug.
Okay.
Have I stayed in touch with people? Yes. So Lemo and Galt did try to talk to us by cell phone quite a bit, but as I write in the book, it's quite a sense that when they're talking to someone by cell phone, they talk at the volume as if their voice was trying to carry that far. So Lama Wangal, when talking to us from Zanskar on a cell phone, is yelling as if he's trying to get to Canada. It's indecipherable. And so I have been more in touch with Lama Wangal through his nephew, who's now in France, almost daily contact with the nephew who takes messages back and forth. Thankfully, there's no COVID in the valley. The valley's largely shut down right now because the winter snows have shut down the Shingula and the Peninsula. So yes, I stay in touch with Sonam Dao, our trek guide, who is online. I desperately want to get back and see Lama Wangal. I have sent him a book and we've sent him lots of things over the years, but so yes, I do stay in touch.
That's a great question. Oh, here's another one from Corey Brewster.
Corey, yeah, we were in the valley itself for over 3 months and under 4, I guess, Corey. We, I have it written down exactly somewhere. I can't, you'd think I'd remember, but we came sometime in maybe around the start of July. I'm trying to remember. Oh no, we might've been mid-July, and then we left around October, November.
Bruce, one comment from one of our patrons, Heather, said, "You have brought some of the most beautiful parts to us, and thank you for that." So that's, I think we all feel that way. I'll ask another question while we see if anyone else will type one up for us. Do your sons ever comment on the family adventure? Have you seen any continued shifts in their behavior as a result of the trip? Or are they young kids being young kids and the trip is over and they move on?
Well, you know what's interesting is like I don't like watching myself on TV. It's like listening to yourself on the answering machine. But so we have this 9-hour series of us traveling around the world, and the boys love to watch it. They watch it, and so I think in some ways that has been, their memories are founded on that. Like maybe they don't remember the incidents, but they remember their memories of it through that. So it's provided a wonderful anchor to it. We talk about it a lot, specifically Bodhi flourished unbelievably for 2 years after we came home. And it was really hard writing this book because after those 2 years, his digestive tract shut down and we lost him. He stopped speaking. He went, and it's been a massive 2-year battle for my wife and I, and he's not better. And we've taken him to Mexico and Texas. And it's been, from the most joyous part of our life to the most difficult. And, so I was writing about him as he was like launching out of Zanskar, and he had this extraordinary 2 years where he, transcended stuff that I had never thought he'd be able to achieve or do perhaps. But the amazing thing is he knows, and we know how he can be when he's well. And so right now we're on another expedition of trying to get him better. So a lot of that was lost and drifted away. But I really do believe, I believe deeply in the power of travel for children. I in so many ways, but I mean, where we've been talking attention, and it would be silly to say you need to go on a trip to pay attention to your kids, but I don't think any parents would disagree that there are so many things that pull us away from home. And even a simple canoe trip with my boys allows me to be with them, and it feels like a reservoir that we fill and continues to be present. And this was the biggest filling of the reservoir that we'd had. And I really, believe it's had an enduring effect on who we are as a family. We're trying to go away again for another year away. Our plans changed because of the current situation, but I think that everyone has a comfortableness with that idea of being away, even Bodhi, who's now almost 14, because of how profound the first experience was.
Yeah, excellent. Here's a great question from Doug Reese saying, how did you exercise while you were there? That is a great question.
Oh, Doug. So when I was thinking about where to go, I looked at places like Bhutan and Sikkim, and Bhutan in particular. I'd been to Bhutan before, and it's obviously an amazing place. But I kind of decided against that and talked to Christine about it because of the lack of ability to really range freely, through those heavy forested valleys. And I had this vision of this you know, treeless land that I would just climb every peak. There was a peak soaring over Paduma. It was probably almost 22,000 feet. And the first week there, I looked at all the routes up it. There was this high amphitheater. I thought I could leave. And in the end, I did nothing. I did nothing. I sat on Lama Wangal's front porch and looked at it. And that was obviously what was supposed to be. I did no exercise. I basically ate sampa and butter tea, and I usually weigh about 200 or 205 pounds. And when I got to Leh, I got on a scale and I weighed 178 pounds. So I guess that was a good diet, nothing but barley porridge. Shauna, we were going to go, so we want, you know, so for me, the yin and yang of Buddhism, surfing is like another way of being extremely present. And there's a deep beauty in surfing. And I've read a book by an author, it's called Daniel Duane. It's called Caught Inside. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful year on the North California coast. I read it 20 years ago, and I just decided right then I want to spend a year of my life doing that. And so we were going to take the kids surfing for a year.
Okay, that'll make up for the lack of structured exercise on your past family trip.
The lack of meditation on this one, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, how about one last question? Oh, sorry, you answered that. Okay, Shauna's one step ahead of me. Can you kind of just help us with, was it an aha moment you had when the trip became an idea? Like, how do you go from having a fleeting idea about an adventure and then actually making it happen? Do you know what I mean? Is that,
yeah,
I'm not sure I worded that well. Like, you know, we all have these great ideas, but then it's another step to actually initiate the plans.
Yeah, I think I've done it enough that, you know, I know you start with nothing. You start with that idea, and then you try to figure out, okay, who's been, you know, I talked to everyone I could who'd spent time in Himalayan monasteries, and tried to understand what would make sense, and tried to, how could we possibly find, you know, permission or a way to go there. And so as soon as the idea came, then I just started kind of scratching away. Then it's a puzzle you're trying to put together. Even the overland trip, there's a few real choke points. One was the North Pacific, which isn't easy to cross. And I didn't really want to buy a sailboat and, you know, tackle that ourselves. And the other was getting across the Himalaya. And if we couldn't get into Tibet, which I was a bit concerned with because we had a film crew with us, and get on the Friendship Highway and down into Nepal, we were looking at having to go around, you know, basically the Kra Isthmus in southern Thailand. We'd have to go all around Burma and Myanmar because there'd be no other road that we could take through there. And I didn't think I was going to take the kids on the KKH into Pakistan. So yeah, there was a few little choke points, and you just start trying to put it together. But luckily we did get onto the Friendship Highway and through.
Okay, thank you. That was excellent. Well, I think, we got one more. How did you decide on the book title? Great question.
I can't see who asked that, but whoever it is. And so, you know, you play with a bunch of titles, and I was called it Kingdom of the Sky for quite a while. And in fact, when I told Taj, my youngest son, that I was going to switch it to Blue Sky Kingdom, he is absolutely beside himself, and he said, Kingdom of the Sky is way better than Blue Sky Kingdom. You can't change the title. He's since let go, but I did feel in a sense that I just kept returning this idea that Zanskar was this kind of, what is called the Forgotten Kingdom, in a 1976 Michael Pessel book, which is really amazing glimpse at that valley. And so that just resonated with me. But then this idea that in meditation above the clouds is always this blue sky, and the opportunity to transit to that clarity. And I felt that Zanskar had provided me with that conduit. And so it was a multiple play on words with it. The sky is always blue in Zanskar. There's nearly never a cloud there. And it is a lost, forgotten kingdom of the sky, but it's also this conduit to this higher plane of awareness. So that's where the title came from.
Excellent. Well, we've got lots of comments coming in just saying a great presentation, and thank you, Bruce. I just want to thank our whole audience. Yes, we may be miles apart right now, but I have to say I feel very connected to everybody listening and watching Bruce present to us tonight. So that's a kind of a big community hug to everybody, and to Bruce for joining us tonight. I can't thank you enough. Yeah, excellent.
Thank you guys for having me. Really an honor. And as I said, a bit ironic to be your first virtual one, but I hope you have a lot more great events.
Well, you've certainly set, you set the bar, my friend.
Well, I hope to see all my friends I can see here in person sometime soon. So you guys take care over there.
We'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.